This video is entitled The Attribute Selector in Pseudo Classes and is a companion to Chapter 10 of So You Want to Learn to Use HTML and CSS by James M. Renault. I'm Dr. Renault and I'll be taking you through this video presentation. In this video, I want to talk about using the attribute selector within CSS, and then we're going to talk about a few of the pseudo classes that you can add to make your selectors even more powerful. You can add a set of square brackets to the end of a selector, including the universal selector, and then you can specify an attribute name. So if you were to say star bracket, attribute name, close bracket, then it will get all of the HTML tags that have that attribute. So you could select for attributes other than class and ID. You could also say attribute equal value. So you could do maybe a class selector and then square bracket attribute equals value, and you would just get the elements that are of that class that have that attribute containing the value. Or if you say attribute star equal value, then it's anywhere that contains that value. If it has a longer value but that value is in the middle, it finds it. So you could either select it that the attribute exists, that the attribute is equal to a specific value, or that the attribute contains this subvalue. So that's an attribute selector. You don't see these used really often, but when you really need it, it's really, really great to have. The next few things I want to show are called pseudo selectors. And actually they're called pseudo classes, sorry. And the pseudo classes allow you to well, pseudo means false. So these are false classes that you can use. For instance, if you follow a selector, whatever the selector happens to be with a colon hover, what happens is that selector will be used if the mouse hovers over that element. So if you wanted an attribute or something to change color, if they move the mouse over it, you can add the colon hover pseudo selector. You can also add the colon link or the colon visited pseudo selector to make an a tag, to make an anchor change its value or change depending on whether it's been visited or unvisited. So the colon link is for an unvisited anchor, and the colon visited will change a visited anchor. So if you want your unvisited anchors to be something other than the blue, or the visited anchors to be something other than the purple that's the default, you can use the pseudo class link or visited. There are other pseudo classes beside these, but these are the most commonly used of the pseudo classes. There's another really handy structural pseudo class known as the Nth Child, and in the parentheses you put a number. So for instance, if you were to say Nth Child with a 2, that's going to mean every other child will have that style applied. This comes in really handy to apply this selector to a table, so that every other row or every third row, if you were to say Nth Child 3, then every third row would be affected by that style. So you can use this, the Nth Child 2 is the most common use of the Nth Child, to make every other row of a table a different style. That makes them sometimes easier to read and makes them kind of fun to look at. So using the Nth Child pseudo is also kind of a neat thing to do with lists, maybe. The last pseudo I want to mention is the not pseudo. So selector colon not, and then in parentheses you can put in a second selector. Now the selector inside the parentheses must be a simple selector, a tag or an ID or a class. So for instance, if you want it to apply, you've got this class, but you say, well, but not this one with this ID. So you've got a class and you'd say not this ID, you'd say dot class colon not open parenthesis pound that special ID, and it would choose the class that's not that ID. It's also kind of neat. You could choose. You could say paragraphs that aren't in this class would also then give you all the paragraphs that are not in a certain class. So the not pseudo, but remember the selector inside the parentheses of the not pseudo has to be a simple selector, just a tag, an ID, or a class. It can't include a combinator. This concludes the brief introduction to the attribute selector or the attribute modifier and a few of the pseudos, a few of the common pseudos. This presentation is copyright 2020 by James Imbrino, PhD. This work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, non-commercial, share-alike 4.0 international license. You can contact me at jim@renejm.com if you find any errors, discrepancies, or have any questions. And remember, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in another presentation.